The tavern reeked of cheap rum and broken promises when Elizabeth's father sealed her fate with a handshake. 1 bottle of spirits for his only daughter. The sailors laughed as they dragged her toward the docks, her screams silenced by calloused hands. This was Port Royal in 1715, where human life came cheaper than tobacco. Just as hope abandoned her, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Captain James Blackwood stood before them, his reputation as the Caribbean's most feared Buccaneer commander preceding him. "The girl comes with me," he declared, tossing a small pouch of gold at the sailor's feet. But why would a man who took whatever he wanted bother to pay for her freedom? Could a pirate who'd spilled so much blood truly be her salvation? Artifact, Captain's logbook, contains secrets of Blackwood's past and his unusual code of honor. The rough hands of sailors pushed Elizabeth forward onto the polished deck of the Tempest. She stumbled, catching herself on a wooden barrel as laughter erupted around her. The ship creaked beneath her feet, already pulling away from the filthy docks of her former life. "Stand up straight. Oh, girl." The voice wasn't harsh, but commanding, a voice accustomed to being obeyed. Elizabeth raised her eyes to meet Captain Blackwood's steady gaze. He stood tall, his weathered face revealing little emotion, but his eyes, they held something unexpected. Not cruelty, not lust, but a calm assessment. "Quinn, show our guest to the spare cabin near mine." Blackwood turned to a broad-shouldered man with a scar running through his left eyebrow. "Captain?" Quinn's surprise was evident. "Not the hold?" "Did I stutter?" There was steel in Blackwood's voice now. Quinn nodded. "Aye, Captain." He gestured for Elizabeth to follow. As they descended below deck, Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs. "What does he want with me?" she finally whispered. Quinn glanced back, his face softening slightly. "The captain has his own code. Been sailing with him for 7 years, and he's never once traded in human cargo." "Quite the opposite." He pushed open a small door. The cabin was modest but clean, a cot, a small table, a porthole letting in the afternoon light. "This is where I stay." Elizabeth couldn't hide her surprise. Captain's orders. "Dinner is at sunset. I'll come fetch you." Quinn turned to leave but paused. "Don't try anything foolish. The sea doesn't forgive mistakes." Left alone, Elizabeth explored her small quarters. A basin of fresh water sat on the table alongside a clean cloth. After washing the grime of the docks from her face, she noticed a small shelf with books. Actual books, precious items she'd rarely been allowed to touch. A knock at the door startled her. Captain Blackwood entered, ducking slightly beneath the low beam. In his hands was a leather-bound book. "Can you read?" he asked without preamble. Elizabeth nodded. Her mother had taught her basics before consumption took her 3 winters past. "Good." He placed the book on the table. "Ship's logs. Thought you might want to understand where you are. Why am I here?" Elizabeth's voice trembled despite her effort to appear brave. Blackwood sat on the single chair, leaving Elizabeth perched on the edge of her cot. "I don't buy people. I don't sell people. When I saw what was happening at that tavern, I had 2 choices, intervene or walk away. So this is charity." Bitterness tinged her words. "This is decency." His response was immediate. "Something in short supply where you come from, I'd wager." Elizabeth looked down. "What happens to me now?" "We make for Port Royal. Once there, you'll have choices. Stay aboard and work as part of the crew, seek employment in town, or passage elsewhere. Until then, you'll be treated as a guest, provided you follow the ship's rules. And what rules are those? Follow orders promptly. No fighting. Everyone works. The sea doesn't care if you're man or woman. It'll kill you just the same if you're careless." Elizabeth studied his face, searching for the lie, the hidden intentions. She found none. Why would a pirate care what happens to me? Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, pain perhaps. "I'm not what you think. And someday you might not be what others have made you believe either." He stood to leave, but paused at the door. "The crew knows not to bother you, but best keep your door latched at night. Old habits die hard for some men." After he left, Elizabeth opened the logbook. Inside, she found meticulous records, coordinates, weather patterns, cargo manifests. But between these entries were other notes. Liberated vessel carrying 24 souls bound for sugar plantations. rescued 3 from shipwreck, delivered safely to Nassau, provided medical attention to fishing vessel crew. This wasn't the record of a bloodthirsty buccaneer. It was something else entirely. A scratching at her door interrupted her reading. Opening it cautiously, she found a thin woman with sharp features and calculating eyes. "I'm May, navigator." Her accent suggested distant shores. "Captain says you dine at his table tonight. I bring clothes." She thrust a bundle into Elizabeth's arms. "Why would he? Captain collects strays like others collect coins." May's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "I was cargo once too. Now I plot our course through stars." She tapped her temple. "Freedom is not just open doors. It's here first." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Elizabeth changed into the simple but clean dress, ran her fingers through her tangled hair, and steeled herself for whatever came next. Perhaps, just perhaps, fate had finally dealt her a kind hand. Artifact, navigation astrolabe, symbolizes Elizabeth's journey into uncharted waters of her new life. Dawn broke over the tempest in ribbons of gold and amber. Elizabeth stood at the railing, watching the sun climb into existence. 3 days had passed since she'd been brought aboard, each one stretching her understanding of this floating world. "You're up early." Quinn's voice startled her from her reverie. The first mate carried coils of rope over his broad shoulders. "I couldn't sleep." "Everything moves constantly," Quinn chuckled. "You'll find your sea legs soon enough. In the meantime, make yourself useful." He dropped the ropes at her feet. "Coil these properly. Like this." His weathered hands demonstrated the technique. Elizabeth mimicked his movements, the rough hemp scratching her soft palms. By the third rope, blisters had formed, but she refused to complain. "Not bad." Quinn nodded approvingly. "Captain says you're to learn, not just hide in your cabin." "Learn what exactly?" "How to survive." He gestured across the deck, where sailors climbed rigging, scrubbed planks, and adjusted sails. "Every skill here means life or death when the sea turns angry." Throughout the morning, Elizabeth was passed from task to task. She scrubbed the galley floor under the cook's watchful eye, sorted dried beans for impurities, and helped the carpenter patch a leaking barrel. By midday, she encountered Rodrigo, the quartermaster. Unlike Quinn's gruff kindness, Rodrigo's eyes held calculation as they swept over her. "So this is the captain's charity." His Spanish accent thickened his words. "Pretty enough, I suppose." "I'm learning to work the ship," Elizabeth replied, lifting her chin. Rodrigo laughed. "The captain collects broken things. Before you, it was May." He nodded toward the bow where the slender Asian woman consulted charts. "A woman navigator, absurd. Yet he values her above men with decades at sea." "Perhaps she's simply better at reading the stars," Elizabeth suggested, immediately regretting her boldness. Rodrigo's eyes narrowed. "Mind your place, girl. The captain's protection won't last forever." Later, Elizabeth approached May cautiously. The navigator was using a brass instrument, holding it to the sky. "It's an astrolabe," May explained, without looking away. "It tells me our position by measuring the height of celestial bodies. You measure the stars to find our way." May lowered the instrument, finally meeting Elizabeth's gaze. "Everything that matters is both distant and constant. The shore changes, shifts, disappears. The stars remain. Rodrigo doesn't seem to think women belong on ships. Rodrigo doesn't think anyone belongs above him." May carefully placed the astrolabe in a wooden case. "The captain found me on a slaver bound for the Americas. I was cargo, like spice or silk. He freed everyone aboard, but I had nowhere to go. When he discovered I could read nautical charts from my father's teaching, he gave me purpose." Their conversation was interrupted by shouts from the crow's nest. "Storm clouds." "Northeast?" The peaceful afternoon transformed into frantic activity. Captain Blackwood emerged from his cabin, barking orders as sailors scrambled to secure the ship. "You, below deck," Quinn ordered Elizabeth, but Blackwood countermanded him. "Let her stay. She needs to see what we're facing." The sky darkened as if night had fallen prematurely. Rain began as distant specks on the horizon, then engulfed them in sheets of water. The ship pitched violently, waves crashing over the bow. Elizabeth clung to a rope, her body drenched and battered. Nearby, a young sailor lost his footing as a massive wave struck. Without thinking, Elizabeth lunged forward, grabbing his shirt as he slid toward the railing. Quinn appeared beside her, helping to haul the boy back to safety. For hours, they battled the tempest. Elizabeth passed buckets, helped secure loose cargo, and held ropes until her hands bled. When the storm finally subsided, leaving them in an eerie calm, she collapsed against a mast. Exhausted beyond measure, Captain Blackwood found her there, offering a flask of water. "You did well," he said simply. "I had no choice." "There's always a choice. You could have hidden below, yet you stayed." He studied her with newfound respect. "Why?" Elizabeth considered this. "Because everyone else was fighting to survive. Why should I do less?" A rare smile crossed his face. "The sea strips away pretense, Elizabeth. It reveals who we truly are." He gestured toward the clearing sky, where stars began to appear. "Like May's astrolabe, it helps us find our position in the world." That night, muscles aching and hands bandaged, Elizabeth stood at the ship's rail, watching phosphorescent creatures illuminate the wake. For the first time in years, she felt something unexpected stirring within her. Not just the will to survive, but the desire to live. Artifact, dagger with pearl handle, hidden by Rodrigo, represents brewing betrayal. 2 weeks at sea had transformed Elizabeth. Her hands had hardened, her skin bronzed from the sun, and her legs had found their steadiness on the rolling deck. She worked alongside the crew now, no longer a curiosity, but a contributing member of the Tempest's floating world. This morning found her mending sails with an older sailor named Giles, whose gnarled fingers showed her the proper stitching technique. "Like this," he demonstrated. "Too loose, and they'll tear again in the first strong wind." Elizabeth copied his movements, her needle flashing in the sunlight. "How long have you sailed with Captain Blackwood?" "Going on 5 years." Giles bit off a thread. "Best captain I've served under, and I've seen more than 30 years at sea. Because he's fair. Because he sees people, not just tools." Giles glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. "Most captains view their crew as interchangeable parts. The captain sees possibilities." Their conversation halted as Rodrigo approached with 2 sailors Elizabeth recognized but had rarely spoken with. Brothers named Harris and Webb, known for their card-playing and quick tempers. "Sail duty again, old man." Rodrigo's tone carried mock sympathy. "The captain works you too hard. Perhaps we need to discuss new arrangements for veteran crew." The 3 men continued past, disappearing behind the main mast, where cargo was stored. Elizabeth noted their furtive glances and hushed tones. "That one's trouble," Giles muttered, jerking his chin toward Rodrigo's retreating form. "Too ambitious by half." When Elizabeth finished her sail duty, she descended to the galley for the midday meal. Taking her bowl of fish stew, she found a quiet corner to eat. The narrow passageway outside the galley led past storage rooms, and voices drifted through a partially open door. "Soft, I tell you." Rodrigo's distinctive accent was unmistakable. "We passed a merchant vessel yesterday, fat with cargo. And did he pursue?" "No. Instead, we changed course to chase rumors of a slave ship." "The captain's always been clear about his priorities," came another voice. "Webb," Elizabeth thought, "his priorities cost us gold." Rodrigo's tone hardened. "When was the last time we divided proper spoils? He spends our share rescuing people who can't pay their way. That girl is just the latest example. What do you suggest?" Harris asked. "A ship needs a captain who puts the crew first." The sound of metal touching metal followed this declaration. "I have contacts in Port Royal who would welcome a crew willing to pursue proper piracy." Elizabeth leaned closer. "Her stew forgotten. Mutiny is a hanging offense," Webb said, his voice wavering. "Only if you fail." Rodrigo's response was silky. "Keep this safe. When the time comes, we'll need to move quickly." Elizabeth retreated as footsteps approached the door. She ducked into an adjacent corridor just as the men emerged, glimpsing something glinting as Rodrigo handed it to Harris. a dagger with a distinctive pearl handle that disappeared into the man's jacket. That evening, Elizabeth sought out May. She found the navigator in her small workspace, charting their course by lamplight. "I need to talk to you," Elizabeth whispered. "About Rodrigo." May's expression remained neutral, but she carefully closed her chart book. "Speak quietly." "Walls have ears on a ship," Elizabeth recounted what she'd overheard. May listened without interruption, her dark eyes revealing nothing. "You must tell the captain," May said finally. "What if he doesn't believe me?" "I'm nobody here. You underestimate your position." May's voice held certainty. "The captain watches you. He sees something in you, just as he saw something in me. Why would Rodrigo risk everything? He's quartermaster already. Some men cannot bear to follow, even a good leader." May sighed. "Blackwood's methods are not traditional piracy. We take from slavers, from those who profit from suffering. We rarely target merchant vessels unless they carry military supplies. And Rodrigo wants more plunder," Elizabeth concluded. "Gold blinds men to honor." May touched Elizabeth's arm. "Be careful. If Rodrigo suspects you heard," the warning needed no completion. That night, Elizabeth lay awake, the ship's creaking underscoring her racing thoughts. The captain had shown her unexpected kindness. Could she remain silent while treachery brewed? Before dawn, she made her decision. She slipped from her cabin and knocked softly on the captain's door. After a moment, Blackwood appeared, fully dressed despite the early hour. "Elizabeth?" His eyebrows rose in question. "I need to tell you something, Captain." She glanced nervously down the corridor. "About Rodrigo." Blackwood studied her face, then stepped aside. "Come in." Some conversations shouldn't be held in passageways. As the door closed behind her, Elizabeth took a deep breath, preparing to test where true loyalty should lie. Artifact, Spanish military insignia, taken from an officer. "Represents the growing external threats. Man the cannons, but hold fire until my command." Blackwood's voice carried across the deck as the Tempest approached the listing Spanish galleon. Through her spyglass, Elizabeth could see figures moving on the distant ship, their distinctive uniforms marking them as Spanish naval officers. Since revealing Rodrigo's treachery 3 days prior, Elizabeth had noticed subtle changes aboard ship. The quartermaster remained in his position. "Better to keep enemies close," Blackwood had explained, but Quinn and trusted crew members now shadowed his movements. The pearl-handled dagger had vanished from Harris's possession during a midnight search. "Why are we approaching?" Elizabeth asked May, who stood beside her at the rail. "They're military, not merchants or slavers." "They've signaled distress," May replied, pointing to the flag flying from the galleon's mast. Captain Blackwood observed certain courtesies of the sea, even with enemies. "Especially with enemies." May's expression remained impassive. "The captain believes how we treat those in need defines us more than how we treat allies." As they drew closer, the galleon's damaged hull became visible. Splintered wood and torn sails suggested a recent battle or storm. "Prepare to come alongside," Quinn shouted to the crew. Men scrambled to position, some visibly anxious at approaching the Spanish vessel. Elizabeth found herself stationed near Blackwood as he called across to the galleon in fluent Spanish. His unexpected linguistic skills startled her. "They claim their rudder is damaged," he translated for the officers around him. "Request assistance with repairs." "It could be a trap," Quinn muttered. "Indeed." Blackwood's eyes never left the other ship. "But if it's genuine, refusing aid makes us no better than those we fight," a Spanish officer responded from the galleon's deck. Whatever he said caused Blackwood's posture to stiffen. "What is it?" Elizabeth whispered. "Their commander knows me." Blackwood's voice was tight. "From before." Before Elizabeth could ask what he meant, a command was shouted from the galleon. Spanish Marines appeared at the rail, muskets raised. "Down!" Blackwood grabbed Elizabeth, pulling her behind the thick wooden wheel housing as musket fire erupted. Splinters flew as bullets struck the deck and masts. "All hands! Battle stations!" Quinn's voice rose above the chaos. The Tempest's crew, well drilled for such emergencies, raced to defensive positions. Cannon ports opened along the ship's side. "Hold fire!" Blackwood commanded, surprising everyone. Load chain shot, target their masts, not the hull. Elizabeth stared at him. They're trying to kill us, and we'll stop them without unnecessary bloodshed. His eyes held unexpected compassion. Their sailors follow orders as ours do. The next minutes unfolded in controlled chaos. The Tempest executed a deft maneuver, presenting her broadside while staying in the galleon's weakened firing arc. When Blackwood finally gave the order, their cannons roared in disciplined sequence. Chain shot, specialized ammunition designed to destroy rigging, tore through the Spanish ship's remaining masts and sails. Prepare grapples, Blackwood commanded. Boarding party with me. Captain, I should lead, Quinn began. You command the Tempest in my absence, Blackwood cut him off. If this goes poorly, get our people to safety. Elizabeth watched in astonishment as Blackwood led 24 armed sailors across to the Spanish vessel. The fighting was brief but intense. The Spanish, already disadvantaged by their damaged ship, were overwhelmed by the disciplined assault. Within 20 minutes, Blackwood returned. Blood stained his sleeve, but he moved with purpose. Behind him, his men herded several Spanish officers onto the Tempest. Secure them in the hold, he ordered. Treat their wounds, provide water. The galleon, Gwyn asked, repairable but not seaworthy for days. I've left them supplies and their small arms. Blackwood turned, noticing Elizabeth for the first time since the battle began. Are you hurt? She shook her head, speechless at the controlled violence she'd witnessed. Later, as the Tempest resumed course, Elizabeth found Blackwood at the stern rail. He held something in his palm, a metal insignia torn from a Spanish uniform. You spared them, she said, joining him. After they tried to kill you, what would killing them accomplish? More widows? More orphans? He closed his fist around the insignia. I've created enough of those. The officer knew you. Blackwood was silent for so long, Elizabeth thought he wouldn't answer. I wasn't always a buccaneer. Once I wore a uniform, not unlike this. He opened his palm, revealing the Spanish military insignia. War taught me to value life, not take it lightly. Is that why you rescued me? And others? Perhaps. His gaze met hers, surprisingly vulnerable. Or perhaps I'm trying to balance the scales for my past actions. As sunset painted the horizon crimson, Elizabeth realized she was seeing beyond the feared Captain Blackwood to the man beneath, a man haunted by his past, yet determined to forge a different future. Artifact, silver hairpin, given to Elizabeth by Blackwood for her protection, contains a hidden Bladeport royal rose from the harbor, like a den of iniquity, dressed in colonial finery. Elizabeth stood at the rail as the Tempest docked, taking in the chaotic blend of naval vessels, merchant ships, and vessels flying less reputable colors. Taverns and warehouses crowded the waterfront, while elegant mansions dotted the hills above, a testament to fortunes made through means both legal and otherwise. Your first time in Port Royal? Gwyn asked, joining her. My first time anywhere beyond my village, Elizabeth admitted. Stay alert. This place devours the unwary. Quinn's scarred face was unusually solemn. The captain has business ashore. You're to remain with the ship until his return. Elizabeth couldn't hide her disappointment. After weeks at sea, the prospect of solid ground, even dangerous ground, held undeniable appeal. Later, as she helped inventory supplies in the hold, Blackwood found her. He carried a small wooden box. I've reconsidered, he said without preamble. You'll accompany me into town. Elizabeth straightened, surprised. What changed your mind? You've proven yourself observant. I need eyes that see what others miss. He handed her the box. This is for you. Inside lay a silver hairpin, elegantly crafted with a mother-of-pearl inlay. It's beautiful, she murmured, confused by the unexpected gift. Beauty is secondary to function. Blackwood demonstrated a hidden catch that released a slender, 4-inch blade from the ornament's shaft. Wear it always while in port. If threatened, aim for the throat or eyes. Elizabeth stared at the deadly implement, suddenly understanding Port Royal's true nature. Is there no law here? There's the king's law for some and no law for others. Blackwood's expression hardened. And there are those who make their own law. I meet with one such man tonight, dressed in borrowed clothes that transformed her into the respectable companion of a ship's captain. Elizabeth walked beside Blackwood through Port Royal's crowded streets. She wore the hairpin prominently, its weight a constant reminder of hidden dangers. Their destination was a merchant's office near the governor's residence. Inside, a corpulent man named Harrington greeted Blackwood with practiced bonhomie. "Captain, I'd heard rumors of your return." His small eyes assessed Elizabeth with undisguised interest. "And with such charming company. Information, Harrington." Blackwood's tone remained businesslike. "What news of Spanish patrols?" While the men conducted their business, Elizabeth remained silent but watchful. She noted how Harrington's gaze flicked repeatedly toward a particular drawer in his desk, how he touched his signet ring whenever speaking of Spanish naval movements. As they departed, Blackwood guided her toward the marketplace. "What did you observe?" he asked. Elizabeth considered carefully. He lied about the Spanish galleon repairs. His hands fidgeted when he claimed they'd be docked for a month. Blackwood nodded approvingly. "What else?" He kept looking at his right desk drawer. "And his ring, he touched it when nervous." "Excellent!" Blackwood's praise warmed her. "Harrington plays all sides, sells information to whoever pays highest. I trust him precisely because I know he's untrustworthy." They visited several more contacts throughout the afternoon. Elizabeth remained vigilant, absorbing the intricate web of alliances and enmities that comprised Port Royal's power structure. As dusk fell, Blackwood escorted her to a respectable inn. "Wait here. I have one more meeting, too dangerous for you to attend." "I've faced danger before," she protested. "Not like this." His hand briefly touched her shoulder. "I need someone I trust to return to the ship if I don't come back." After he departed, Elizabeth paced the small room, increasingly uneasy. Something in Harrington's manner had troubled her. Acting on instinct, she slipped out of the inn. Navigating the darkening streets, she retraced their steps to Harrington's office. A light still burned inside. Through a gap in the curtains, she glimpsed the merchant in conversation with a man in a Spanish naval uniform. Elizabeth edged closer, straining to hear their words. "Blackwood suspects nothing," Harrington was saying. "He believes the galleon will be docked for repairs through the month." "Excellent." The Spanish officer placed a heavy purse on the desk. "My captain will be pleased. We sail tomorrow to intercept the Tempest. This time we'll be prepared for his tactics." Heart racing, Elizabeth backed away. She needed to warn Blackwood. As she turned, she collided with a dockhand, his rum-soaked breath washing over her. "What's this? A little spy?" His meaty hand closed around her wrist. With her free hand, Elizabeth reached for the silver hairpin. In one smooth motion, she released the hidden blade and slashed it across the man's arm. He howled, releasing her. She ran, not toward the inn, but toward the tavern district where Blackwood had gone for his final meeting. Time was short, and the Tempest's fate, along with her newfound freedom, hung in the balance. Artifact, forged, letter of marque, document exposing corruption in colonial government. Rusty Anchor Tavern reeked of spilled rum and unwashed bodies. Elizabeth pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding against her ribs. Men's hands reached for her as she passed, but she twisted away, one hand clutching the silver hairpin. In the tavern's darkest corner, she spotted Blackwood deep in conversation with a gaunt man whose weathered face suggested decades at sea. Both looked up sharply as she approached. "You were told to remain at the inn." Blackwood's voice was dangerously quiet. "Harrington betrayed you," Elizabeth gasped. "I saw him with a Spanish officer. They plan to intercept the Tempest tomorrow." The gaunt man whistled softly. "Seems your girl has good instincts, James." Blackwood's expression remained hard, but he gestured for her to continue. "They know your tactics from the galleon engagement," she added. "They're prepared this time." "Did they see you?" Blackwood demanded. Elizabeth's hand went to the hairpin. "A dockhand caught me listening. I used this." She indicated the concealed blade. "He'll live." Something like pride flickered across Blackwood's face before he turned to his companion. "Bennett, our timeline has changed. So it seems. Bennett slid a folded parchment across the table. This becomes even more valuable then. Blackwood tucked the document inside his coat. We sail with the midnight tide. Spread the word to our friends, quietly. Outside the tavern, Blackwood gripped Elizabeth's elbow, guiding her through a maze of side streets to avoid main thoroughfares. That was both brave and foolish, he said at last. Brave to follow your suspicions. Foolish to go alone. There wasn't time to find you first. There's always time for proper planning. His pace quickened as distant shouts echoed behind them. Harrington's man must have raised the alarm. What did Bennett give you? Elizabeth asked. Insurance. Blackwood's expression was grim. A forged letter of marque with Governor Lawson's signature. What does that mean? It means the governor has been authorizing private vessels to attack Spanish ships while maintaining official peace. He guided her down an alley, useful leverage if we need it. They reached the docks as the moon emerged from behind clouds. The Tempest's silhouette stood out against the harbor waters. Quinn! Blackwood's sharp whistle carried across the water. Prepare to sail! Activity erupted on the ship's deck. Elizabeth could make out sailors moving with practiced efficiency, despite the unexpected departure. As they approached the gangplank, torches appeared at the far end of the dock. A dozen armed men, led by a naval officer, marched toward them. Captain Blackwood, the officer called. By order of the governor, you are to surrender your vessel for inspection. Blackwood pushed Elizabeth behind him. Get aboard, he muttered. Tell Quinn, Protocol 3. What about you? I'll delay them. His hand found hers briefly. Go. Elizabeth raced up the gangplank while Blackwood strode confidently toward the approaching force. She found Quinn already organizing the crew. Captain says Protocol 3, she relayed breathlessly. Quinn's scarred face hardened. All hands. Immediate departure. Gunners stand ready. What's Protocol 3? Elizabeth asked as sailors rushed to their positions. It means we leave with or without the captain. Quinn's voice was flat. And we're prepared to fight our way out. Elizabeth stared in horror as Blackwood stood alone, facing the armed men. She could just make out his voice, calm and reasonable, as he presented papers to the officer. We can't leave him, she insisted. Captain's orders. Quinn's tone brooked no argument. He survived worse. The Tempest's moorings were cast off. With agonizing slowness, the ship began to drift from the dock. Elizabeth gripped the rail, watching as the confrontation continued. Blackwood appeared to be arguing, gesturing with the document Bennett had provided. Suddenly, a commotion erupted. The naval officer lunged forward. Blackwood sidestepped, drawing his sword in a fluid motion. Steel flashed in the torchlight. He's outnumbered, Elizabeth whispered. Quinn handed her a spyglass. Watch! Through the lens, she saw what the darkness had concealed. Dark figures moved behind crates and barrels along the dock. Blackwood's friends that Bennett had warned. As the soldiers closed in on Blackwood, these shadows sprang to life. The organized arrest dissolved into chaos. The captain rarely leaves things to chance, Quinn said, with grim satisfaction. The Tempest had now cleared the dock, sails catching the night wind. Elizabeth kept her gaze fixed on the diminishing shoreline, searching for any sign of Blackwood. There, she pointed to a figure racing down the dock, pursuers close behind. Without hesitation, the figure leapt into the dark water. Long moments passed with no sign of movement in the black harbor. He's a strong swimmer, Quinn assured her, though uncertainty tinged his voice. Minutes stretched like hours. The Tempest continued its departure, Port Royal's lights receding behind them. Elizabeth refused to leave her post, straining to see any disturbance in the water. Finally, a dark shape appeared off the starboard bow. "Man overboard!" Elizabeth shouted. "Starboard side!" Sailors rushed to lower ropes. Soon, a dripping Blackwood was hauled aboard, the forged letter still secured inside his waterproof coat pocket. "Set course east-southeast," he ordered, as if his dramatic escape were routine. "We have an appointment with a slave ship that the Spanish Navy doesn't want us to keep." His eyes met Elizabeth's across the deck. In them she saw something new, respect. Certainly, but also a question about her place in the dangerous world she'd chosen to enter. Artifact, locket with portrait, Blackwood's keepsake revealing his noble origins. The storm struck without warning. One moment, the tempest sailed under clear skies. The next, dark clouds engulfed them like a predator swallowing prey. Rain lashed the deck in horizontal sheets as monstrous waves tossed the ship like a child's toy. "Secure the mainsail." Blackwood's voice fought against the howling wind. "All hands battle stations." Elizabeth had learned that storms were fought like enemies at sea. She worked alongside the crew, muscles straining against nature's fury. Weeks aboard had transformed her from passenger to sailor, her body lean and strong from constant labor. The forward hatch is taking water. Quinn shouted above the tempest's roar. "Elizabeth, with me!" Blackwood commanded. Together they descended into the ship's creaking belly, water already ankle-deep in the forward compartment. Sailors passed buckets in a desperate chain, while Blackwood and Elizabeth inspected the hull for damage. "There!" She pointed to a section where planks had sprung apart, seawater pulsing through with each wave. "It's widening." Blackwood assessed the breach with a practiced eye. "We need to reinforce it from inside. Help me with these support beams." They worked in desperate tandem, positioning wooden braces against the weakened hull. The ship lurched violently, throwing Elizabeth against Blackwood. He steadied her with strong hands before returning to their task. Another massive wave struck. The ship groaned like a wounded beast as something snapped overhead. The compartment door slammed shut with a sickening finality. Blackwood tried the handle. Jammed. "The frame has warped." They were trapped below deck as water continued to rise. "Quinn will find us," Elizabeth said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Eventually." Blackwood didn't sugarcoat their predicament. "But we need to manage this breach in the meantime." They worked methodically, shoring up the damaged hull with every available material. When a larger piece of cargo broke loose, Elizabeth narrowly pushed Blackwood from its path, earning herself a gash along her forearm. "You're hurt." His voice softened with concern as he tore a strip from his shirt to bind the wound. "It's nothing." She winced as he tightened the makeshift bandage. "I've had worse from my father." Something dark flashed across Blackwood's face. "No one deserves such treatment, least of all from family." The intimacy of the moment struck Elizabeth suddenly, trapped together in the ship's bowels while death raged outside, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. The lantern's glow illuminated his features, softening the hard lines of command. "Why did you really save me that day?" she asked, the question that had lingered for weeks finally finding voice. Blackwood was silent so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he reached inside his shirt and withdrew a silver locket, opening it to reveal a painted miniature of a woman with striking blue eyes. "It's Elizabeth's eyes. She could have been your sister," he said quietly. "My wife, Eleanor. She died 12 years ago." Elizabeth stared at the portrait, understanding dawning. "She's why you help people." "Partly." He tucked the locket away. "I was born Lord James Harrington Blackwood, second son of the Earl of Wexford. Naval career, bright future, the Empire's faithful servant. What changed?" "I was ordered to transport slaves from Africa." His voice hardened with remembered rage. "I'd been taught they weren't truly people, just cargo. But when disease broke out aboard, I saw mothers trying to save their children, men sacrificing rations for the sick. Their humanity was undeniable, while my own seemed increasingly questionable. You refused orders? Worse, I freed them at our first port." A grim smile touched his lips. "Committed high treason against the crown. Eleanor supported my decision, though it cost us everything. We fled to the colonies, where she died of fever 3 years later." The ship creaked ominously around them, but in that moment, the storm seemed distant compared to the one raging in Blackwood's eyes. "So Captain Blackwood was born from Lord Blackwood's ashes," Elizabeth said softly, "a pirate with principles." His laugh held no humor. "An outlaw trying to restore some small measure of justice to an unjust world." "It's a worthy cause," she offered. "Is it? Sometimes I wonder if I'm merely atoning for past sins." His gaze held hers. "And you, Elizabeth? What future do you see for yourself once we reach safe harbor? The question caught her off guard. Until now, she'd thought only of survival, not possibility. I don't know, she admitted. I never dared dream beyond the next day. And now? Before she could answer, the compartment door suddenly splintered open. Gwyn stood there, axe in hand. Captain, the storm's shifting course. We need you above. Water sloshed around their knees as they made their way to the ladder. Before ascending, Blackwood paused. When this is over, he said quietly, we'll finish this conversation. Elizabeth nodded, acutely aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. Something neither storm nor sea could wash away. Artifact, ancient map, shows. Location of Blackwood's secret island refuge, 4. Those he's rescued land ho. The cry from the crow's nest pulled Elizabeth from her thoughts. She joined the gathering crew at the starboard rail, straining to glimpse the approaching shoreline. The island that materialized through the morning mist wasn't the bustling port she'd expected. Instead, verdant jungle spilled down steep hillsides to meet pristine beaches. No docks or settlements were visible, only untamed wilderness. Where are we? She asked May, who studied the horizon with familiar eyes. Somewhere that doesn't exist on naval charts. The navigator's lips curved in a rare smile. The captain calls it Providence. Quinn supervised as sailors prepared longboats. Elizabeth noticed they carried not just supplies, but furniture, tools, even seedlings carefully packed in damp cloth. Are we establishing a settlement? She asked Blackwood when he emerged from his cabin, a weathered leather tube under his arm. Continuing one, he corrected, unrolling an ancient map on a barrel top. The yellowed parchment displayed the island in remarkable detail, with annotations in multiple languages spanning decades. This island was once a refuge for the Taino people fleeing Spanish conquest, he explained. Later it sheltered Maroons, escaped slaves who built hidden communities. I found it abandoned 15 years ago. The map showed freshwater springs, defensible points, fertile valleys, and treacherous reefs that would deter casual exploration. Most intriguingly, it marked various settlements with dates and names. You've been bringing people here all along, Elizabeth realized. Those who need a fresh beginning. Blackwood traced a finger along the eastern shore. The community now numbers over 200 souls. They govern themselves, trade discreetly with select merchants, and maintain vigilant watches. As they approached the shoreline, figures emerged from the tree line. Elizabeth tensed until she saw them waving welcomingly. Their longboats were met by a diverse group, men and women of various ages and origins, their faces weathered but unbroken. A dignified African man with silver-streaked hair clasped Blackwood's arm in greeting. Captain, we'd begun to worry. It's been nearly 5 months. Troubles in Port Royal delayed us. Isaiah, Blackwood introduced Elizabeth to the man who served as the settlement's elected leader. Isaiah studied her with kind but assessing eyes. Another soul seeking refuge. Elizabeth saved my life in Port Royal, Blackwood replied. She's earned her place here or aboard ship. Her choice entirely. The settlement surpassed all Elizabeth's expectations. Nestled in a sheltered valley, simple but solid dwellings housed families who worked communal gardens. A smithy rang with productive labor, while fishermen mended nets near a small fleet of boats. We've built something precious here, Isaiah explained, as he guided her through the community. Freedom, yes, but also purpose. Everyone contributes according to their abilities. Children of all backgrounds played together, receiving education from elders who preserved knowledge from their diverse origins. Elizabeth observed former slaves teaching alongside a European scholar who'd fled religious persecution. How do you remain hidden? She asked. The reefs deter naval vessels, and we maintain a constant watch. Isaiah pointed to barely visible lookout posts on surrounding ridges. When strange sails appear, we retreat into prepared shelters in the hills. So far we've avoided discovery. That evening the community gathered for a feast, welcoming the Tempest's crew. Music filled the air as people who had once been property or outcasts celebrated their hard-won freedom. Elizabeth found Blackwood away from the festivities, watching from a quiet vantage point. "This is what you truly do," she said. "Not just rescuing people, but giving them somewhere to go. A single rescue means little without opportunity afterward." His voice was reflective. "I learned that lesson painfully. You've created something remarkable." Elizabeth gestured toward the celebration. "These people have dignity, purpose. They created this themselves. I merely provided the location." He turned to her. "Which brings me to an important question. The Tempest sails with the tide tomorrow. Will you continue with us, or would you prefer to stay here?" The question hung between them, weighty with implication. Elizabeth had never before been offered genuine choice about her fate. "If I stay, what would my role be?" "Whatever you choose to make it. The community needs teachers, healers, farmers, builders." He paused. "If you sail with us, the dangers continue. Rodrigo's ambitions haven't faded, and the Spanish still hunt us." Elizabeth watched the dancers, their faces alight with joy that seemed foreign after her lifetime of hardship. Safety beckoned, a chance for peace after so much turmoil, yet her gaze returned to the Tempest, silhouetted against the evening sky. In just weeks, the ship had become more home than anywhere she'd known before. "And its captain—" "I'll sail with you," she said firmly. "I haven't learned all I need to know of the sea, or of freedom." Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, relief perhaps, or gladness carefully contained. Before he could respond, Quinn approached with urgent strides. "Captain, lookouts, reporter ship approaching from the north, Spanish colors." The celebration instantly quieted as Isaiah mobilized the community's practiced evacuation protocol. Within minutes, the settlement transformed. Fires doused, valuables gathered, people moving purposefully toward the hillside shelters. "How did they find us?" Elizabeth asked as they hurried back to the longboats. "That," Blackwood said grimly, "is exactly what we need to discover." Artifact, brass spyglass, symbolizes Elizabeth's expanding vision and growing confidence again. Blackwood's command brooked no argument as Elizabeth picked herself up from the deck, wooden practice sword still clutched in her hand. 2 weeks had passed since their hasty departure from Providence Island. The Spanish vessel had proven to be merely a patrol ship that passed without incident, but the close call had heightened everyone's vigilance. Elizabeth wiped sweat from her brow and resumed her fighting stance. Around them the crew went about their duties, occasionally glancing at the captain, training his unlikely protégé. "Mind your footwork," Blackwood advised. "Your balance determines whether you stand or fall." They circled each other under the Caribbean sun. Elizabeth had discarded her heavy skirts for practical sailor's trousers weeks ago, her movements now unencumbered as she analyzed her opponent's positioning. Blackwood lunged. Instead of retreating, Elizabeth sidestepped and countered, her wooden blade stopping just short of his ribs. "Better." Approval warmed his voice. "You're learning to read intentions rather than just reacting." The training sessions had become daily ritual. Swordplay in the mornings, navigation with May in the afternoons, and evenings spent poring over maps and logbooks in Blackwood's cabin. Elizabeth absorbed everything with fierce determination, her mind as hungry for knowledge as her body was for skill. Enough for today. Blackwood sheathed his practice sword. "You've earned this." He presented her with a brass spyglass, its surface etched with intricate nautical designs. Elizabeth accepted it reverently. "It was Eleanor's," he explained. "She insisted on learning every aspect of seafaring, refused to be merely a passenger on our journey." Elizabeth extended the instrument, testing its weight and balance. "Thank you. I'll honor her memory by using it well." From the corner of her eye, she noticed Rodrigo watching their exchange, his expression unreadable before he turned away later. As the Tempest navigated a treacherous reef passage, Elizabeth stood beside May at the helm, the new spyglass helping her identify the subtle color changes in the water that indicated safe passage. "You've become indispensable," May observed. 3 months ago you were cargo. Now you help chart our course." "I had good teachers." Elizabeth adjusted the heading slightly, compensating for a cross-current and natural aptitude. May's almond eyes narrowed thoughtfully. The captain sees it too. He's never trained anyone so intensively. The unspoken implication hung between them. Elizabeth focused on the horizon, unwilling to examine the complex emotions that had developed between herself and Blackwood. That evening she climbed to the crow's nest, seeking solitude. The endless expanse of stars above and sea below brought perspective that the crowded deck couldn't provide. Through her spyglass, she traced constellations May had taught her to recognize, celestial signposts guiding their journey. "Permission to join you?" Blackwood's voice carried up from below. Elizabeth smiled despite herself. "It's your ship, Captain." He climbed with practiced ease, settling beside her in the small space. For a time, they simply existed together in comfortable silence, sharing the vast night. "I have a proposition," he finally said. "The ship needs a proper quartermaster." The statement jolted Elizabeth from her contemplation. "Rodrigo has proven untrustworthy. I've kept him in position to monitor his movements, but it's time for change." "You can't mean me?" She lowered her spyglass in disbelief. "You've earned the crew's respect. Your organizational skills are excellent. You've mastered navigation basics, and you understand supply management." His expression was serious. "Most importantly, I trust your judgment." The men would never accept a woman as quartermaster. They already look to you for direction in many matters. Blackwood's certainty was unwavering. "You've transformed yourself, Elizabeth. Perhaps it's time you recognized what others already see." Before she could respond, a shout came from the deck below. "Sail, northwestern quadrant!" Elizabeth immediately raised her spyglass, focusing on the distant horizon. A ship materialized in the lens, its profile unmistakable even in moonlight. "Spanish frigate," she reported. "Gunports open. They've found us," Blackwood murmured. Again, they descended rapidly to the deck, where Quinn was already organizing the crew for potential combat. Rodrigo stood at the rail, watching the approaching vessel with an expression that struck Elizabeth as oddly satisfied. "Battle stations," Blackwood ordered. "But hold fire! Their guns outrange ours. We need to close distance on our terms or outrun them." "We should flee," Rodrigo argued. "They outgun us 3-1. And why do they keep finding us?" Elizabeth challenged, suspicion crystallizing into certainty. "This is the third Spanish vessel to cross our path in 2 weeks. Rodrigo's hand moved subtly toward his belt knife. "Watch your accusations, girl. Search his cabin," Elizabeth told Blackwood, never taking her eyes from Rodrigo. "I'd wager you'll find a signaling mirror or similar device." "You've gone mad," Rodrigo snarled. But the flash of panic in his eyes confirmed her suspicion. "Quinn, escort Rodrigo to the hold," Blackwood commanded. "May, take the helm. On to port. We'll use that small island's shadow for cover while we prepare." As the crew mobilized around them, Blackwood gave Elizabeth a brief, fierce look. "It seems your first act as quartermaster will be helping save this ship from treachery within and enemies without." Elizabeth tightened her grip on the brass spyglass, now a symbol of not just vision but responsibility. "I won't let you down." "I know," he replied simply, and in those 2 words lay a trust more valuable than any treasure the Tempest had ever carried. Artifact, broken shackles, represent liberation, and Blackwood's mission. Spanish frigate had been cleverly outmaneuvered, but the victory felt hollow. A search of Rodrigo's cabin had revealed a carefully concealed signaling mirror and coded charts marking the Tempest's common routes. The quartermaster now resided in the brig, awaiting judgment for his treachery. "He claims the Spanish promised him a ship of his own," Quinn reported as the officers gathered in Blackwood's cabin. "Said he was tired of wasting time on rescue missions instead of proper piracy." Elizabeth, newly appointed as quartermaster, studied the maps spread across the table. Her brass spyglass lay beside navigational instruments, a symbol of her elevated position that still drew sideways glances from some crew members. "His betrayal nearly cost us everything," she said. What will happen to him? Ship's articles are clear on the punishment for treachery, Blackwood replied, his expression grave. But first we have more urgent matters. He indicated a location on the chart where May had calculated the position of their primary target, a Portuguese slave ship, bound for Brazilian plantations, according to our intelligence. The São Cristóvão carries over 300 souls, Blackwood continued. Our successful liberation of those captives matters more than Rodrigo's punishment. The crew is uneasy, Quinn cautioned. They whisper that Rodrigo's betrayal is bad luck, that we should focus on merchant prizes for a time. Then remind them of our purpose. Blackwood's voice hardened. Those who sailed with me solely for gold have long since departed. The rest know what we stand for. The strategy session continued late into the night. Elizabeth absorbed every detail of the planned interception, aware that her first major action as quartermaster would test not only her abilities, but the crew's acceptance of her authority. Dawn found the Tempest cutting through calm seas, sails trimmed for maximum speed while maintaining a low profile. Elizabeth stood at the rail, scanning the horizon with her spyglass. The weight of the coming confrontation settled in her stomach like lead. Nervous? May asked, joining her. Terrified, Elizabeth admitted. Not of the fighting, but of failing those who depend on us. Both our crew and those we hope to free. May nodded, understanding. The captain felt the same before his first rescue mission. I remember how his hands trembled as he gave orders, though he'd never admit it. Now, I can't imagine him afraid of anything. That's because you've only seen him after years of practice. May's smile was knowing. We are all forged by our actions, Elizabeth. Today is another step in your forging. The call came just past noon. Sail ho! As the São Cristóvão appeared on the horizon, the Tempest's crew, despite their misgivings, moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for the complex maneuver Blackwood had planned. Remember, the captain addressed them. We aim to free the captives with minimal bloodshed. The Portuguese crew are not our primary enemies. The institution they serve is what we fight today. Elizabeth took her position, directing the gunners to prepare chain shot for disabling the slave ship's rigging, rather than destroying its hull. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain others must hear it, yet her voice remained steady as she relayed commands. The São Cristóvão spotted them too late. The Tempest closed rapidly, flying merchant colors until the last possible moment before raising their true flag, a banner not of traditional piracy, but of Blackwood's own design, featuring broken chains against a blue field. Fire! Blackwood commanded as they came alongside the larger vessel. The Tempest's guns roared in disciplined sequence, the chain shot tearing through the slave ship's sails and rigging. Before the Portuguese crew recovered from the initial shock, grappling hooks flew across the narrowing gap between ships. Boarding party with me, Blackwood ordered, drawing his sword. His eyes met Elizabeth's. Quartermaster, secure our ship. Part of her longed to join the boarding party, to directly participate in the liberation. Yet she understood the trust Blackwood placed in her. Commanding the Tempest itself was no small responsibility. The fighting was brief but fierce. From the Tempest's deck, Elizabeth directed supporting fire, watched for Portuguese reinforcements, and prepared for the incoming flood of freed captives. When the first of these appeared on deck, thin, shackled figures blinking in the harsh sunlight, the abstract purpose of their mission became viscerally real. Medical supplies ready, she ordered. Fresh water stations established. Blankets for all who come aboard. The rescue operation proceeded with well-rehearsed coordination until a desperate shout came from the slave ship. Elizabeth raised her spyglass to see Blackwood locked in combat with the Portuguese captain on the upper deck, blood staining both men's shirts as she watched in horror. Blackwood faltered, his left leg buckling. The Portuguese captain pressed his advantage, blade flashing toward Blackwood's throat. Without conscious thought, Elizabeth seized a loaded pistol from a nearby sailor. Years of watching her father shoot birds had taught her basic principles of aim. She steadied her breath, sighted down the barrel and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the water. The Portuguese captain staggered, clutching his shoulder. In that moment's reprieve, Blackwood regained his footing and subdued his opponent. Hours later, with the São Cristóvão scuttled and over 300 freed captives safely aboard the Tempest, Elizabeth found Blackwood in the makeshift infirmary. The ship's doctor finished bandaging his thigh wound as she approached. "You saved my life," Blackwood said simply. Elizabeth held up a pair of broken iron shackles she'd kept from the slave ship. "You've saved hundreds. This seems fair exchange." His hand closed over hers, warm and solid around the cold metal. "We saved them together, as we'll save many more." The certainty in his voice filled her with purpose, greater than any she'd known before. The broken shackles in their joined hands represented not just today's victory, but a shared commitment to the battles yet to come. Artifact, medicinal herb pouch. Elizabeth uses to heal Blackwood. Shows her caretaking roll fever gripped Captain Blackwood by the third day. What had seemed a manageable wound to his thigh had festered despite the doctor's initial treatment. Elizabeth found him in his cabin, sheets soaked with sweat, his normally commanding voice reduced to incoherent murmurs. "How long has he been like this?" she demanded of the ship's doctor, an elderly man named Hawkins, who had once served in the King's Navy. "Fever began last night." Hawkins wrung out a cloth in cool water. "The blade that struck him must have been unclean. Infections set in deep." Elizabeth examined the wound herself, noting the angry red streaks extending from the inflamed gash. She'd seen similar wounds in her village. Some survived, many didn't. "We need to draw out the poison," she said decisively. "My mother taught me herbs before she passed." The doctor looked skeptical, but Quinn, who had entered silently, nodded approval. "The captain trusts you. Do what you must." Elizabeth hurried to her cabin, retrieving a small pouch of dried herbs she'd gathered on Providence Island. Isaiah's wife had shown her which plants held medicinal properties. Instructions Elizabeth had absorbed eagerly. Returning to Blackwood's side, she mixed a poultice of crushed garlic, yarrow, and comfrey with sea salt. The mixture smelled pungent, but had drawn infection from lesser wounds before. "This will hurt him," she warned as she removed the old bandages. "Better pain now than death later," Quinn replied grimly. "The Tempest needs her captain." The poultice applied, Elizabeth began the vigil that would stretch across 3 days and nights. She bathed Blackwood's burning forehead, coaxed broth between his cracked lips, and changed the herbal dressing regularly. When exhaustion threatened to overcome her, May arrived to insist she rest. "You cannot save him by destroying yourself," the navigator counseled. "I will watch for 2 hours. Sleep." Elizabeth reluctantly complied, though true rest eluded her. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Blackwood falling on the slave ship's deck, blood blooming across his shirt. On the second night, his fever peaked. Delirious, he thrashed against the restraints they'd reluctantly applied to keep him from reopening his wound. "Eleanor," he called out. "The children? Save the children first." Elizabeth held his hand through the worst of it, speaking calm reassurances, even when uncertain he could hear. As dawn broke on the third day, his thrashing subsided, his breathing steadied, and his skin, though still warm, lost its terrifying heat. "The fever's breaking," Dr. Hawkins confirmed with obvious relief. "Your herbs seem to have worked, quartermaster." By evening, Blackwood had regained consciousness, though weakness kept him bedridden. Elizabeth sat beside him, peeling an orange saved from their last port call. "How long?" he asked, voice hoarse from disuse. 4 days since the battle," she replied, offering a segment of fruit which he accepted with slightly trembling fingers. "You've been delirious for most of it." A shadow crossed his face. "What did I say during the fever?" Elizabeth hesitated. "You called for Eleanor several times, and you spoke of children." Blackwood closed his eyes briefly. "There are parts of my past I've never shared with the crew. You needn't share them now. Perhaps I should." His gaze, though weakened, held its characteristic intensity. "Eleanor was with child when the fever took her. Our first, after years of hoping." The revelation struck Elizabeth deeply. Not just a wife, but an unborn child lost, grief compounded beyond measure. "I'm sorry," she said simply, knowing no words could truly address such sorrow. "It shaped everything after," he continued. "Every child freed from bondage, every family kept intact, all echo what I couldn't save." Elizabeth understood now the fierce dedication that drove him, recognized it as both atonement and purpose. While Blackwood rested again, Elizabeth organized the ship's log in his absence. Among the papers in his desk, she discovered a folded notice that chilled her blood, a bounty announcement from the Spanish crown offering 5,000 gold pesos for Captain Blackwood, dead or alive. The sketch accompanying it captured his likeness with uncomfortable accuracy. The crimes listed included piracy, sedition, theft of Spanish property, and interference with lawful commerce, their euphemism for slave trading. The reward was enough to tempt even loyal men. Elizabeth returned to Blackwood's cabin, notice in hand. "You should have told me the price on your head," she said without preamble. He didn't seem surprised by her discovery. "Would it have changed your decision to stay aboard?" "No, but it explains Rodrigo's betrayal more clearly." She studied the document. "This bounty would buy a small fleet. The Spanish consider me a particular nuisance." A hint of pride colored his weak voice. "I've cost them dearly over the years, and now, with your injury, we continue our mission." Determination strengthened his tone. "We make for Providence with our liberated passengers, then resume our patrol of slave routes." Elizabeth noticed how he said "our" rather than "my," acknowledging her full partnership in the endeavor. The realization warmed her more than she cared to admit. "Rest now," she advised, tucking the herb pouch beside his pillow. "The Tempest remains on course, and I've organized the watches until your return to duty." As she turned to leave, his hand caught hers. "Elizabeth." Her name on his lips carried weight beyond its syllables. "Thank you for my life." The simple gratitude, coupled with the vulnerability of his weakened state, stirred something profound within her. She squeezed his hand gently before withdrawing. "We're even now, Captain," she replied with a small smile, "although I suspect we've only begun our true journey together." Artifact, ship's bell, used as an alarm when the mutiny begins. The wind died at sunset, leaving the Tempest drifting in an eerie calm. Elizabeth stood at the quarterdeck rail, the brass spyglass hanging unused at her belt as she studied the unnaturally flat sea. Captain Blackwood had regained much of his strength over the past week, though he still walked with a slight limp from his healing wound. "I don't like this stillness," Quinn murmured beside her. "Like the ocean's holding its breath?" "How far to Providence?" she asked. "3 days with good wind." Quinn gestured at the slack sails. "Considerably longer in this dead calm." Elizabeth sensed his concern went beyond the weather. "What troubles you, Quinn?" The first mate glanced around before lowering his voice. "The crew's restless. Rodrigo may be locked in the brig, but his words have taken root with some. They question the captain's decisions, especially continuing with the rescue missions while carrying a price on his head. Blackwood has always been clear about our purpose." "Aye, but men's memories grow short when their purses grow light." Quinn's scarred face was grim. "Keep your eyes open, quartermaster." Later, Elizabeth found Blackwood in his cabin, studying charts by lamplight. His face appeared gaunt in the flickering shadows. Recovery having taken its toll, "Quinn believes there may be trouble brewing among the crew," she reported. Closing the door behind her, Blackwood didn't look surprised. "I've sensed it. Rodrigo planted seeds of discontent well before we discovered his treachery. Should we change course? Perhaps a merchant prize would appease them and compromise what we stand for?" He shook his head. "I won't be blackmailed by fear, nor will I abandon those counting on us." Elizabeth admired his principles, even as she worried about their practicality. "At least allow me to double the guard on Rodrigo. If trouble comes, it will likely start with him. See to it." Blackwood's hand brushed hers briefly as she turned to leave. "Elizabeth, be careful. Loyalty is a rare commodity in times of uncertainty." She nodded, suddenly unable to voice the emotions his concern stirred within her. Instead, she slipped silently from his cabin to arrange the additional guards. Near midnight, the oppressive stillness shattered. Elizabeth bolted awake at the first clang of the ship's bell. Not the measured rings marking time, but an erratic, desperate pealing that signaled emergency. She had barely seized her sword when her cabin door burst open. Me stood there, a bleeding cut across her forehead. "Mutiny!" the navigator gasped. Harris and Webb released Rodrigo. "They've taken the gun deck and armory." Elizabeth rushed to Blackwood's cabin, finding him already armed and issuing orders to loyal crewmen. "How many with Rodrigo?" he demanded. "Nearly half the crew," Quinn reported grimly. "They control the lower decks and most of the weapons." Blackwood's expression hardened. "And our liberated passengers?" "Secure in the forward hold for now, with guards, I trust. But if Rodrigo takes the ship," the implication needed no elaboration. The formerly enslaved passengers would become valuable commodities again under Rodrigo's command. "We make our stand here," Blackwood decided. "Barricade access to the upper decks and captain's quarters. Quinn, secure the longboats. We may need to evacuate our passengers if the worst happens." The next hours passed in a nightmare of scattered fighting. Rodrigo's forces controlled most of the ship, but couldn't breach the barricaded upper deck. A tense stalemate developed as dawn approached. Elizabeth helped tend wounded loyalists in the makeshift infirmary they'd established in Blackwood's cabin. Blood stained her shirt, though none of it her own. "They're preparing something," May reported from her lookout position. Gathering near the main hatch with makeshift rams, Blackwood, checking the priming on his pistols, nodded grimly. "They'll rush us soon. We're outnumbered, but they'll have to come up the narrow companionway. We can hold them there." "Until when?" Elizabeth asked pragmatically. "We can't retake the ship with the men we have. We don't need to." Blackwood pointed through the stern windows, where the first hint of a breeze ruffled the previously flat sea. "We need only hold out until wind fills the sails." "I don't understand." Blackwood's smile held no humor. "Rodrigo wants the tempest, but he knows nothing of the reefs ahead. Only May can navigate them safely." Understanding dawned on Elizabeth. "You planned for this possibility. I prepare for all contingencies." His gaze held hers. "Elizabeth, if I fall, get our passengers to safety. Providence's coordinates are hidden in the false bottom of my sea chest. Isaiah will welcome you." Before she could respond, Quinn's warning shout preceded a thunderous crash as the mutineers' rams struck the barricaded hatch. "They're breaking through!" a sailor called. "Hold steady," Blackwood commanded, positioning himself at the front of their defensive line. "Remember what we fight for!" The barricade splintered. Rodrigo himself appeared in the gap, a triumphant snarl on his face as he leveled a pistol at Blackwood. "Your crusade ends today, Captain," he sneered. "The Tempest will return to proper piracy under my command." "You know nothing of proper command," Blackwood replied evenly. "A captain protects his people, not sells them for personal gain." Pretty words from a dead man. Rodrigo's finger tightened on the trigger. Elizabeth lunged forward, her sword deflecting Rodrigo's arm upward as the pistol discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Chaos erupted as mutineers poured through the broken barricade, clashing with Blackwood's loyal defenders. In the confined space, the fighting became desperate hand-to-hand combat. Elizabeth found herself back-to-back with Blackwood, their swords moving in coordination as if they'd fought together for years rather than months. A sudden lurch of the ship sent combatants on both sides staggering. The wind had risen dramatically, catching the Tempest's sails and propelling her forward, directly toward the treacherous reefs Blackwood had mentioned. "The helm!" Blackwood shouted to May. "Take control!" But Rodrigo, recognizing the navigator's importance, intercepted her path. "No one touches the wheel but my men!" As Elizabeth watched in horror, Rodrigo seized May, holding a blade to her throat, while ordering one of his supporters to the helm. "You've lost, Blackwood," he crowed. "Surrender now, or watch your precious navigator die before the Tempest becomes mine." Blackwood lowered his sword slowly, his eyes meeting Elizabeth's with a silent message she immediately understood. She nodded imperceptibly, fingers tightening around her own blade. "Very well, Rodrigo," Blackwood said with apparent resignation. "You win." Artifact, flintlock pistol, Blackwood's last weapon, represents their diminished but not eliminated power. Salt water and regret have similar tastes. Elizabeth decided as she bailed water from the longboat for the third time since dawn. Around her 14 survivors, Blackwood, Quinn, May, and 11 loyal crew members looked as bedraggled as she felt, their expressions grim in the merciless tropical sun. 3 days had passed since Rodrigo's mutiny forced them from the Tempest. Blackwood's apparent surrender had been a ruse. While Rodrigo gloated over his victory, Quinn had quietly organized the loyal crew to lower a longboat. When the ship struck the outer edges of the reef with a sickening crunch, the momentary chaos allowed Blackwood to free May and lead his people over the side, while the mutineers scrambled to control the damaged vessel. "Water rations," Blackwood announced, passing a small flask that made its way around the cramped boat. Each person took only the barest sip. Their supplies dwindled dangerously with each passing hour. Elizabeth studied Blackwood surreptitiously as he consulted with May about their position. His face was sunburned and drawn, his once imposing frame diminished by recent trials. Yet his eyes remained resolute, his voice steady as he maintained their fragile morale. "Land," May said suddenly, pointing to the horizon where a dark smudge interrupted the endless blue. "Small island, uninhabited from the look of it. Can we reach it before nightfall?" Blackwood asked. The navigator calculated silently, measuring the dying wind against their meager strength for rowing. "If we push hard, yes." Every able body took turns at the oars, muscles burning with effort after days of exposure and limited rations. Elizabeth rowed until her blisters burst and reformed, then rowed more. As the sun began its descent, the smudge resolved into a verdant island with a white sand beach. The longboat scraped ashore, just as twilight painted the sky in violent oranges and purples. Exhausted, they dragged themselves onto the beach, some collapsing immediately onto the sand. "Quinn, organize a water search party," Blackwood ordered, displaying remarkable energy despite his own condition. "May help Elizabeth assess our supplies. Everyone else, gather wood for a signal fire." Elizabeth catalogued their meager resources: a compass, May's sextant, a single flintlock pistol with powder and shot for 6 rounds, Blackwood's spyglass, 2 daggers, a small medical kit, fishing line, and rations for perhaps 2 more days if strictly conserved. Not much to sustain. 15 people, she reported privately to Blackwood. "After the others dispersed to their tasks, we've survived with less," he replied, though the confidence in his voice seemed forced even to her ears. "Rodrigo took our ship. Our mission, everything we've worked for. Anger and exhaustion made her blunt. Those we liberated will likely be sold at the next port." "How can you remain so composed?" Blackwood's facade cracked momentarily, revealing the depth of his own anguish. "Because despair is a luxury we cannot afford, Elizabeth." His hand touched hers briefly. "I've lost ships before. I've lost much more than ships. What matters is that we endure to fight another day." Quinn's return with news of a freshwater spring improved their immediate situation. As night fell, they gathered around a small fire, conserving wood for the larger signal fire they would light at dawn. "We should establish watches," Elizabeth suggested. 2 people at a time, 2-hour shifts." Blackwood nodded approval. "Quinn and I will take first watch. All of you, get what rest you can." Elizabeth found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. She observed Blackwood's silhouette against the starlit sky as he paced the perimeter of their camp. The flintlock pistol, their only firearm, secured at his waist. Later she awoke to find him seated beside her, his expression distant as he gazed at the ocean that had both given and taken so much from him. "You should be resting," she murmured. "I find peace in the stars," he replied softly. "They remain constant, even when everything else changes. What will we do now?" Truthfully, his sigh held the weight of responsibility for 14 lives. "We survive. We signal any passing ships. We make tools, find food, create shelter, and if no ships pass, then we build our own vessel, however crude, and make for Providence." His determination seemed boundless. "This setback ends nothing, Elizabeth." Morning revealed their island more clearly, perhaps 2 miles across at its widest, with a central hill rising to a modest peak. After a breakfast of strictly rationed supplies, Blackwood organized exploration parties. "Quinn, take 4 men and search for additional water sources and edible plants. May use the high ground to survey our position. See if you can determine our location relative to known shipping lanes. Elizabeth, you're with me. We'll assess the island's resources for materials we can use." As they hiked through dense vegetation, Elizabeth and Blackwood discovered coconut palms, bamboo groves, and evidence of wild boar, all critical resources for survival. More importantly, Elizabeth noted how Blackwood's focus on practical matters had begun revitalizing their dispirited crew. "You're giving them purpose," she observed, as they collected bamboo for shelter construction. "Even here, stranded with nothing, purpose exists wherever we choose to find it," he replied. "My father taught me that before I rejected his world of privilege. It's perhaps the only lesson of his I kept." They worked until midday, when the tropical heat forced a retreat to the shade. Blackwood removed his weathered coat, revealing the flintlock pistol he kept constantly at his side. 6 shots. Elizabeth nodded toward the weapon. "What will you use them for?" "Defense, if necessary. Hunting, if critical." His hand rested on the pistol's grip. "But most importantly, hope. As long as we retain some power, however limited, we're not merely victims of circumstance." By sunset, their situation had improved markedly. Simple shelters stood along the tree line. A signal fire platform awaited on the highest point, and fishing spears fashioned from bamboo had yielded enough food for a modest meal. As the group gathered around the cooking fire, Elizabeth noticed a subtle shift in their demeanor, from defeated castaways to determined survivors. Blackwood had transformed their perspective through sheer force of will. Later, as they took the midnight watch together, Elizabeth finally asked the question that had lingered since their escape. "Do you believe Rodrigo will succeed with the Tempest?" Blackwood's laugh held no humor. "The Tempest was damaged on the reef. Without May to navigate, they'll either wreck her completely or limp to port for repairs they can't afford. Rodrigo doesn't understand that a ship is more than wood and canvas. It's the people who give it purpose." "Like you've given us purpose here," Elizabeth said quietly. In the moonlight, his expression softened as he turned to her. "We gave each other purpose, Elizabeth. Long before this island." The truth of his words settled between them, neither needing to elaborate on the bond that had formed through shared dangers and principles. As dawn approached, Elizabeth spotted a distant sail on the horizon, its silhouette unmistakable against the lightening sky. "Blackwood!" She gripped his arm, pointing. "A ship, artifact. Merchant captain's hat symbolizes unexpected alliance and new opportunity." The distant sail grew larger as dawn broke fully over the island. Elizabeth and Blackwood scrambled to light the signal fire, sending plumes of smoke into the cloudless sky. The rest of their small band quickly joined them, hope animating exhausted faces. "Merchant vessel by the cut of her jib," Quinn assessed, squinting at the approaching ship. "Dutch, perhaps, or Spanish," May cautioned. "We should be prepared for either possibility." Blackwood remained silent, studying the ship through his spyglass. After a long moment he lowered the glass, an unreadable expression crossing his face. "The Golden Horizon," he announced. "Captain Van Houten's vessel. You know this ship?" Elizabeth asked. "We've crossed paths." Blackwood's tone revealed little. "He's neither friend nor enemy, a pragmatic merchant who follows opportunity rather than conviction. Will he help us?" "That depends on what help costs him." Blackwood handed the spyglass to Elizabeth. "And what we can offer in return." The Golden Horizon changed course, clearly having spotted their signal. As the ship drew closer, they could see activity on her deck, the lowering of a longboat, men climbing aboard it. "Armed men," Quinn noted grimly. "They're cautious, as they should be in these waters, Blackwood straightened his salt-stained coat. "Quinn, May, Elizabeth, with me to meet them. Everyone else remain visible but keep to the tree line. If this turns sour, retreat into the jungle." The approaching longboat carried 6 men, their weapons evident but not brandished. In the stern sat a corpulent figure with a distinctive red beard and an extravagantly plumed hat, Captain Peter Van Houten, whose reputation as a shrewd trader was known throughout the Caribbean. Well, the Dutch captain's booming voice carried across the water as the boat grounded on sand. The infamous Captain Blackwood, reduced to waving from a deserted island. Fortune has a curious sense of humor. Blackwood stepped forward, his dignity intact despite his bedraggled appearance. "Captain Van Houten, your presence is fortuitous. For you, certainly." Van Houten heaved his considerable bulk from the boat, boots sinking into wet sand. His shrewd eyes assessed the castaways. "I count 15 souls. The notorious Tempest carried 3 times that number. Mutiny, I presume?" "Our current circumstances are temporary," Blackwood replied evenly. "We seek passage to Port Royal." Van Houten laughed heartily. "Direct as always. And how would you compensate me for this detour? Your pockets seem as empty as your ship's berth. I can pay once we reach port. I have accounts with several merchants, accounts that may be as illusory as your former command." Van Houten stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Perhaps instead you might offer information. The Spanish are particularly interested in your whereabouts these days." Elizabeth tensed, her hand moving instinctively toward the knife at her belt. If Van Houten meant to claim the bounty on Blackwood's head, the Spanish would pay handsomely for me, Blackwood acknowledged calmly. "But consider this. I've intercepted Spanish shipments worth 20 times my bounty over the years. Knowledge of their shipping schedules and routes would be far more valuable to a businessman like yourself." Interest flickered in Van Houten's eyes. "You would betray your enemies so easily. I would trade information that allows a merchant to avoid unnecessary entanglements while seeking legitimate trade." Blackwood's voice remained level. "Unlike the Spanish, I don't consider honest commerce my enemy." A calculating silence fell as Van Houten weighed his options. Elizabeth studied the merchant captain, noting how his jovial exterior masked a ruthless pragmatism. Finally he chuckled. "Your reputation for clever negotiation is well earned," he conceded. "Very well. Passage to Port Royal for you and your people, in exchange for Spanish shipping intelligence, and discretion regarding our presence aboard your vessel," Blackwood added. Van Houten's expression turned serious. "I risk much by aiding you, Blackwood. The Spanish would confiscate my ship and hang my crew if they discovered I'd harbored their most wanted pirate. All the more reason for our arrangement to remain between us." The merchant captain extended his hand. "Agreed. But understand this, my crew follows my orders without question. Should you or your people create difficulties aboard my ship, our agreement ends immediately. My people are disciplined," Blackwood clasped the offered hand firmly, "and grateful for your assistance." Within the hour, they were aboard the Golden Horizon, assigned sparse but adequate quarters in the ship's hold. As a gesture of unexpected generosity, Van Houten invited Blackwood, Elizabeth, Quinn, and May to dine in his cabin that evening. The merchant captain's quarters reflected his prosperous trade, fine furnishings, silver plates, and excellent wine that tasted like paradise after days of brackish water. "To unlikely alliances," Van Houten toasted, raising his glass, "and profitable ventures for all." Later, as they returned to their quarters, Elizabeth walked alongside Blackwood in the narrow passageway. "Can we trust him?" she whispered. "No more than he trusts us," Blackwood replied quietly. "But our interests align for now. Van Houten values profit above all else, and betraying us to the Spanish would earn him powerful enemies among the merchant captains who benefit from our disruption of Spanish trade routes." "He seemed particularly interested in you," Elizabeth observed. "Beyond just the bounty. We've had dealings before." A shadow crossed Blackwood's face. "Not all favorable." In their cramped quarters, May spread out a small chart she'd managed to preserve in her clothing during their escape. "If we reach Port Royal, what then?" The Tempest is lost to us. The ship is lost, Blackwood corrected. But what the Tempest represented endures in this company. Quinn nodded in agreement. We rebuild. Find another vessel. First, we gather intelligence, Blackwood said. Rodrigo will have taken the Tempest to one of 3 ports for repairs. We need to know which one. And then? Elizabeth asked. Though she already suspected the answer, Blackwood's expression hardened with determination. Then we reclaim what's ours. That night, unable to sleep on the gently swaying merchant vessel, Elizabeth found Blackwood at the stern rail, gazing at the moonlit wake. He held Van Houten's distinctive plumed hat, apparently given as some private joke between the captains. There's history between you and Van Houten, she said, joining him. More than you've shared. Blackwood turned the ostentatious hat in his hands. 7 years ago he helped me escape a Spanish prison. Not from kindness. I promised him a share of treasure that didn't exist. His mouth quirked in a half-smile. He's never quite forgiven me for the deception, though he respects the audacity. Yet he helps us now, because I offer something valuable. Blackwood's expression grew distant. Every alliance in this world is built on mutual benefit, Elizabeth. Remember that when we reach Port Royal. You expect betrayal there. I expect complications. He placed the merchant captain's hat on the rail between them, a symbol of their temporary, fragile alliance. But with you, Quinn, and May at my side, I also expect to overcome them. Artifact, ornate mask, Elizabeth wears to infiltrate high society gathering Port Royal, bustled with the usual chaos of commerce and corruption as the Golden Horizon docked. Captain Van Houten had honored his agreement, delivering Blackwood and his people without alerting authorities. They disembarked separately in small groups to avoid attention, gathering at a modest inn on the outskirts of town that Blackwood had used in the past. The Tempest isn't in harbor, Quinn reported after scouting the docks. No sign she's been here at all. Rodrigo wouldn't risk bringing her to Port Royal so soon after the mutiny, Blackwood reasoned. Too many here know her as my vessel. Elizabeth returned from her own reconnaissance of the markets and taverns where gossip flowed as freely as rum. There's talk of a damaged pirate ship limping into Nassau 2 weeks ago. The description matches the Tempest. Nassau, Blackwood considered this. Rodrigo has connections there. He could arrange repairs without too many questions. Messi spread a chart across the scarred table in their rented room. Nassau is 4 days' sail with favorable winds. But we lack a ship and crew. And funds, Quinn added bluntly. Van Houten's generosity ended at the gangplank. Blackwood paced the small room, his determination undiminished by their circumstances. We need resources quickly. Allies, information, and gold. I may have something. Elizabeth produced a crumpled notice she'd torn from a public board. Governor Lawson is hosting a masked ball tomorrow night. Every merchant and naval officer of consequence will attend. Blackwood's expression darkened at the governor's name. Lawson is deeply entangled with both Spanish interests and the slave trade. His hands are as bloody as any pirate's, though he hides behind official seals, which makes his ball the perfect gathering of potential sources. Elizabeth's eyes held a spark of calculated daring. Wealthy merchants who might fund a venture, naval officers with information about the Tempest, perhaps even Rodrigo's contacts. You're suggesting we infiltrate the governor's mansion. Gwyn looked incredulous. Not all of us, Elizabeth clarified. A small party would attract less notice. Blackwood knows the social protocols, and I can move among servants to gather information. Blackwood studied her with newfound respect. It's audacious, and precisely the kind of unexpected move that might succeed. The following evening found Blackwood transformed. Gone was the weathered pirate captain, replaced by a convincing facsimile of colonial gentry. In borrowed finery and an elegant half-mask, he became once again Lord Blackwood, his noble bearing requiring no costume. Elizabeth's transformation was equally remarkable. May had helped fashion her a modest but respectable gown from purchased fabric, while a borrowed necklace completed the illusion of a merchant's daughter. Her mask, more elaborate than Blackwood's, featured feathers and silver filigree that drew attention upward. away from her sun-darkened hands that betrayed a life at sea. Remember, Blackwood instructed as their hired carriage approached the governor's illuminated mansion, "We seek information only. Avoid Harrington at all costs. He would recognize you despite the mask." "And if we're discovered?" she asked. Quinn and 3 men wait at the servants' entrance. "At the first sign of trouble, we retreat through the kitchens." The governor's residence blazed with hundreds of candles, its ballroom crowded with Port Royal's elite. Elizabeth felt strangely exposed despite her mask, convinced her true identity must be obvious to all. Yet as Blackwood smoothly guided her through the introductions, she realized how effectively wealth and confidence shielded one from scrutiny. Lord James Harrington, he introduced himself to a portly merchant, using his true noble name while omitting the notorious Blackwood. "Recently arrived from Charleston with my niece, Miss Elizabeth Harrington." They separated as planned, Blackwood circulating among merchants and ship owners, Elizabeth drifting toward the edges where servants and less prominent guests exchanged the true gossip of the colony. Near a potted palm, she overheard 2 naval lieutenants. "The dispatch mentioned the Tempest specifically," one said, his voice lowered. "Spanish Commander Alvarez has personal orders to sink her on sight. Wasn't she taken in a mutiny?" "New captain altogether?" "Doesn't matter to the Spanish. That ship has cost them too dearly over the years." Elizabeth moved on, gathering fragments of intelligence like precious gems. A merchant's wife mentioned a pirate vessel undergoing extensive repairs in Nassau. A drunken shipbuilder complained about a rush commission for replacement masts, big enough for a frigate. The most valuable information came from an unexpected source, Governor Lawson himself. As Elizabeth passed near a partially open study door, she heard the governor's distinctive voice. "The arrangement is simple, Captain Rodrigo." The name froze Elizabeth in mid-step. "You provide the Spanish with Blackwood's location. They provide you with amnesty and the right to operate the Tempest under letters of marque. And what does the governor of Port Royal receive for facilitating this arrangement?" The voice was unmistakably Rodrigo's, though Elizabeth couldn't see him through the narrow door opening. 10% of all prizes taken under your new commission, plus the satisfaction of removing a persistent thorn from British-Spanish relations. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. Rodrigo was here, in the mansion, negotiating with the governor while the Tempest underwent repairs in Nassau. This changed everything. She retreated carefully, searching for Blackwood among the dancers. She found him in conversation with a group of merchants, his charm evident even from a distance. Catching his eye, she signaled with a discreet gesture they had established beforehand, urgent information. Blackwood excused himself smoothly and met her in a quiet alcove. "What have you learned?" "Rodrigo is here," she whispered. "Meeting with Governor Lawson now. They're arranging Spanish amnesty in exchange for you." His expression hardened. "And the Tempest?" "Confirmed in Nassau for repairs. But there's more. The Spanish commander Alvarez has orders to sink the ship on sight, regardless of who commands her." "The governor plans to double-cross Rodrigo," Blackwood concluded. "Once he delivers me to the Spanish, Lawson will ensure the Tempest is destroyed, eliminating all witnesses to his collusion." A commotion near the study interrupted them. The door flung open as Rodrigo emerged with the governor, both men scanning the ballroom. "Time to leave," Blackwood said quietly, taking Elizabeth's arm. Back through the garden as planned, they moved casually toward the terrace doors, maintaining the illusion of guests seeking night air. Behind them, Rodrigo's voice rose above the music. "Blackwood, I know you're here." Heads turned throughout the ballroom. Elizabeth felt Blackwood's grip tighten on her arm as they increased their pace without breaking into obvious flight. They had nearly reached the terrace when a familiar figure stepped into their path. Harrington, the merchant who had betrayed them before. His eyes widened with recognition despite Elizabeth's ornate mask. "Seize them!" he shouted. "The pirate Blackwood and his woman!" Guards moved to block the exits as pandemonium erupted among the guests. Blackwood pulled Elizabeth toward a side corridor, abandoning the garden escape route. Plan has changed, he muttered. We fight our way out. Artifact Ship's Wheel represents control and destiny, the prize they fight to reclaim. Nassau Harbour lay silent under the new moon, a perfect darkness for clandestine approaches. The small sloop they'd acquired through Van Houten's reluctant assistance glided toward the anchored silhouette of the Tempest, its sail lowered to minimize detection. 2 weeks had passed since their narrow escape from the governor's ball. That night had ended in desperate flight through Port Royal's back alleys, Quinn and his men creating a diversion that allowed Blackwood and Elizabeth to reach safety. One loyal crew member had been captured, another wounded, the price of their intelligence gathering growing steeper by the day. Now, with the Tempest's location confirmed and a skeleton crew assembled, they prepared for the most audacious gambit yet, reclaiming their ship from under Rodrigo's nose. 8 men visible on deck, Quinn reported in a whisper, lowering his spyglass. Skeleton watch while repairs continue. The new foremast is in place, but rigging remains incomplete. Perfect, Blackwood murmured. They won't expect an attack while the ship is still under repair. Their plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Their sloop carried only 18 fighters. Blackwood, Elizabeth, Quinn, May, and 14 loyal sailors gathered through discreet recruitment. They would approach from the harbour's blind side, board silently, and overwhelm the night watch before raising the alarm. If successful, they would control the Tempest before Rodrigo and the majority of his crew returned from their shore leave. Remember, Blackwood addressed the assembled company in hushed tones, we take the ship intact. Disable rather than kill when possible. These men were our shipmates once, misguided. Not necessarily our enemies. Elizabeth checked her weapons one final time, a short sword, 2 daggers and a pistol. She prayed she wouldn't need to discharge. The sound would alert the entire harbour to their presence. Blackwood's hand found hers briefly in the darkness. Stay close to Quinn during the initial boarding. I'll take the quarterdeck with you, she countered firmly. His hesitation lasted only a moment before he nodded. Very well. As they drifted closer, Elizabeth studied the Tempest's familiar silhouette. Despite the new mast and ongoing repairs, the vessel remained unmistakably theirs, a ship built for purpose rather than show, modified over years to Blackwood's exacting specifications. Seeing it under another's command felt like a personal violation. Now, Blackwood ordered as they slipped into the Tempest's shadow. Grappling hooks, their metal claws wrapped in cloth to muffle sound, arced through the darkness. Most caught the railing on first attempt, testament to the crew's skill and determination. One by one, they climbed the ropes with practiced silence, Quinn leading the first wave, Blackwood and Elizabeth following with the second. Elizabeth crested the rail, dropping soundlessly to the deck. A mutineer stood merely 10 feet away, his back turned as he gazed out at the harbour. Before he could react to the soft thud of her landing, she closed the distance and pressed her dagger against his throat. Not a sound, she whispered. We aren't here to kill you. Around the deck, similar scenes unfolded as Blackwood's people subdued the watch. Their surprise was complete. Within minutes, 7 of the 8 watchmen were bound and gagged, secured in the hold under guard. The 8th had escaped notice temporarily, emerging from below with a lantern that illuminated the intruders. His shout of alarm pierced the night before Quinn silenced him with a well-placed fist. Too late, Blackwood grimaced. They'll have heard him in town. Prepare for company. They worked rapidly to secure their position, raising the gangplank and positioning defenders at vulnerable points. Elizabeth joined May in checking the captain's cabin and navigation room, finding charts annotated in Rodrigo's hand, planned routes that focused exclusively on merchant prey. Abandoning entirely Blackwood's mission of liberation, he's scheduled to sail with the morning tide, May noted, examining the calculations. The repairs must be nearly complete. A commotion from the dock interrupted them. Torches bobbed through the darkness as a crowd approached, angry voices rising above the gentle harbour sounds. Blackwood! Rodrigo's distinctive accent carried across the water. I know you're aboard. You've saved me the trouble of hunting you down. Elizabeth and May rushed to join Blackwood on the quarterdeck. where he stood illuminated by a single lantern, deliberately making himself visible to those below. "The Tempest is under her rightful command again, Rodrigo," he called down. "Take your men and find another ship to steal." "This vessel sails under Governor Lawson's authority now," Rodrigo shouted back, "with letters of marque making her a legal privateer, not a pirate ship. Surrender now, or face the consequences of attacking a Crown-sanctioned vessel." Elizabeth could see at least 30 men gathered behind Rodrigo, some already attempting to secure boats to reach the Tempest. "We're outnumbered," she said quietly to Blackwood, "even with the advantage of holding the ship. Numbers aren't everything." His expression remained confident. "Quinn, prepare the port-side guns. Load with chain shot." Elizabeth understood immediately. The chain shot would devastate the small boats without causing broader damage to the harbour. A precision defence rather than indiscriminate destruction. You would fire on your former crew. Rodrigo taunted, seeing the gun ports opening. "I thought the great Captain Blackwood valued life above all." "I value justice," Blackwood replied calmly, "and freedom. You abandoned both when you betrayed us." The standoff continued as boats pushed off from the dock, carrying Rodrigo and his most loyal supporters. The first wave approached rapidly, men preparing grappling hooks of their own. "Fire," Blackwood ordered. The cannon's roar shattered the night. Chain shot whistled across the water, splintering the lead boat into fragments. Men plunged into the harbour, their curses lost amid the chaos as the remaining boats hastily reversed course. In the confusion, Elizabeth noticed a solitary figure climbing the anchor chain on the starboard side. Rodrigo himself, using the diversion of the boats to attempt a solo boarding. "Blackwood," she called in warning, already racing across the deck. She reached the rail just as Rodrigo hauled himself over, cutlass drawn and murder in his eyes. Their blades met with a metallic clash that sent vibrations down her arm. Despite weeks of Blackwood's training, Rodrigo's superior strength immediately forced her back. "The captain's whore thinks she's a fighter now," he sneered, pressing his advantage with brutal slashes that required all her agility to evade. Elizabeth felt the quarterdeck stares at her back, realizing he had deliberately maneuvered her away from assistance. A particularly vicious blow knocked her sword aside. Leaving her momentarily defenseless, Rodrigo lunged, triumph in his eyes, only to howl in pain as Blackwood's blade sliced across his extended arm from behind. "Face me." "Traitor," Blackwood demanded, positioning himself between Elizabeth and Rodrigo. "This ends between us." What followed was a masterclass in swordplay. Two expert fighters, with intimate knowledge of each other's techniques, engaged in lethal combat. Rodrigo's greater strength matched against Blackwood's superior skill, their blades tracing silver arcs in the lantern light. Despite his injured arm, Rodrigo fought with desperate ferocity, driving Blackwood back toward the ship's wheel. A lucky strike caught Blackwood's thigh, the same leg previously wounded in the slave ship battle, causing him to stumble. Rodrigo pressed forward for the kill, only to scream as Elizabeth's dagger embedded itself in his shoulder from her well-aimed throw. The momentary distraction allowed Blackwood to regain his footing. With a complex maneuver that belied his injury, he disarmed Rodrigo, sending the cutlass spinning across the deck. "It's over," Blackwood declared, his blade at Rodrigo's throat. Below, the remaining boats had retreated to the dock, the attackers recognizing their leader's defeat. The Tempest, against all odds, was theirs again. Artifact, wedding bands, fashioned from a gold coin, symbolize Elizabeth and Blackwood's union. Providence Island welcomed the Tempest home with joyous celebration. Bonfires dotted the beach as the liberated community gathered to greet their returning protectors, Isaiah leading the welcoming party that waded into shallow water to help secure mooring lines. 6 weeks had passed since the reclaiming of the Tempest in Nassau Harbor. They had sailed immediately after defeating Rodrigo, completing the remaining repairs at sea to avoid the inevitable response from Governor Lawson's forces. The journey had been arduous but triumphant, their mission and purpose restored. Rodrigo himself sat in the ship's brig, sullen and diminished. Unlike the mutineer, Blackwood believed in justice rather than vengeance. The community would determine Rodrigo's fate through their established council, rather than summary punishment. As Elizabeth supervised the offloading of supplies, she reflected on the transformation of her life in the months since her father had traded her for rum. From property to be bartered to quartermaster of the Tempest, the journey seemed impossible, yet here she stood. "You're quiet today," Blackwood observed, joining her at the rail. His recent wound had healed well, though he still favored his legs slightly when tired. "Contemplating change," she replied. "The village has grown since we were last here." Indeed, new structures dotted the hillside, a larger schoolhouse, expanded gardens, and a proper dock under construction. What had begun as a desperate refuge had evolved into a thriving community of free people. "Isaiah has led them well," Blackwood agreed, "better than I could have." "You gave them the opportunity for self-governance," Elizabeth reminded him. "Few men with power willingly share it." That evening, as the reunited community feasted together, Isaiah formally convened the council to address important matters, including the fate of their prisoner. "Rodrigo has committed crimes against this community and the Tempest's mission," Isaiah stated, as the former quartermaster was brought before them. "His actions endangered many lives and betrayed our principles. What say you to these charges?" Rodrigo's defiance had eroded during his confinement. "I sought profit rather than principle," he admitted, "the path of a true pirate rather than Blackwood's crusade." "And now," Isaiah pressed, "I maintain that Blackwood's mission is folly, fighting against institutions too powerful to defeat." Rodrigo's gaze swept the assembled community. "But I recognize that I betrayed those who trusted me. For that, I will accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate." The council deliberated, while Blackwood and Elizabeth walked along the moonlit beach, deliberately abstaining from the decision to demonstrate their respect for the community's autonomy. "What will they decide, do you think?" Elizabeth asked. "Exile, most likely." Blackwood gazed toward the horizon. "They understand the dangers of keeping him here, yet they've rejected execution as a punishment since the community's founding. And the Tempest? What course do we chart now?" Blackwood turned to her, his expression unusually vulnerable in the silvery light. "That depends partly on you, Elizabeth." "Me?" "I've commanded the Tempest for 15 years, he said quietly. "Perhaps it's time for change." Alarm rose in her chest. "You're leaving the ship?" "Not exactly." He took her hands in his. "I'm proposing a partnership beyond that of captain and quartermaster. The Tempest would continue her mission, but with shared command, if you're willing." Understanding dawned slowly. "You're asking me to marry me," he finished simply. "Not as captain to subordinate, but as equals in all things." The directness of his proposal matched the honesty that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. No flowery sentiments or grand gestures, just the truth of their hearts laid bare. "I would be honored," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within. "Though I suspect such an arrangement is unprecedented among pirate vessels." "We've never been conventional pirates." His smile held warmth rarely displayed before others. "Why start now?" The following morning, the council delivered their verdict on Rodrigo, exiled to a British colony in the north, with resources sufficient for a new beginning, but far from Spanish territories, where he might resume his betrayal. As a Spanish merchant vessel transported the former quartermaster away, the community gathered for a different ceremony on the island's highest point, overlooking both settlement and sea. Isaiah presided as Elizabeth and Blackwood exchanged simple vows. No church sanctified their union, no government recorded it, yet it held more legitimacy in their eyes than any official blessing. For their wedding bands, Blackwood had melted down a single gold coin, Spanish in origin, claimed during their first mission together. The metal had been fashioned into two plain rings by the community's blacksmith, symbols of a bond forged through shared purpose rather than convention. With this ring, Blackwood spoke the traditional words with uncharacteristic tenderness. I pledge my life and loyalty to you, in calm seas and tempests alike. Elizabeth's response mirrored his, her weathered hands steady as she placed the matching band on his finger. Around them, the assembled community, people of all origins united by their quest for freedom, witnessed the union with approving smiles. Later, as celebration continued below, Elizabeth and Blackwood stood at the precipice, the tempest visible in the harbour beyond. News reached us during your absence, Isaiah informed them, joining them at the overlook. The Spanish commander, Alvarez, has been given additional ships specifically to hunt the Tempest. They call her the Phantom Ship now, a legend that refuses to be sunk. Let them hunt, Elizabeth said with quiet confidence. The sea is vast, and our cause is just. And what is that cause, truly? Isaiah asked. Liberation? Justice? Or something more personal? Blackwood's hand found Elizabeth's, their matching rings catching the afternoon light. The right of every soul to chart their own course, he answered, to be captain of their own destiny. As sunset painted the horizon in brilliant hues, they returned to the Tempest together, not as captain and rescued maiden, but as equal partners in the continuing voyage. The ship had been restored, her mission renewed, her purpose strengthened by all they had overcome. On the quarterdeck, they stood together at the wheel, hands joined upon the weathered wood that had guided them through so many storms. Where to? Elizabeth asked, though she already knew the answer. Blackwood's gaze swept the open horizon, endless with possibility. Wherever freedom needs defending, the Tempest's sails filled with the evening breeze, carrying them toward adventures yet unwritten.